Good afternoon.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm okay too. May I ask you to please tell us your name and share anything about yourself you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Sure. So my name is David Alexander, and I'm the CIO at Shaw University. And I've had a variety of different IT roles throughout my career, but I'm at Shaw now and I'm enjoying it. Spent a lot of time at other higher eds in the area, including UNC Chapel Hill and Duke University.
Okay. How did you end on the path to become a CIO? Was that something you intentionally wanted to become a CIO, or was it happenstance?
I think it evolved over time, but I knew when I got out of college, when I finished my undergrad, with the job that I wanted. And ironically, I actually ended up in that same exact job many years later.
Mhm.
But after that, it was more of a, that was an IT director role. And I really liked that. And then what's the next step after that? And so the CIO role is, what I was doing before, but with a broader scale, not just worrying about a school, but worrying about an entire university. So that was a pretty logical transition for me. And I'm certainly enjoying it. I've still got a lot to learn, and still trying to figure it out. So it's been a fun ride.
So is North Carolina home?
It's been home for a long time. I came down here after I graduated from my undergrad degree. And before that, I lived in Maryland most of my childhood growing up. I was in DC when I was real little, born in Texas, but that's kind of my background.
Wow, you've seen almost all of the country, east, west, south.
A little bit. I was pretty small in Texas, but that's where I started out.
Is there a discernible difference between the Northeast and the Southeast, say North Carolina versus Maryland, DC area?
Yeah, I think the people down here are a little nicer. In Frederick was plenty fine. There really wasn't any problem in Frederick, but in DC, I don't know if it's the traffic or what, but people just are a little more agitated, a little colder, and a little I don't know how to say it, but just not as warm and pleasant as they are down here.
One of the things I learned about my few visits to DC is do not let the light turn green and you haven't started moving, because they start blowing their horn at you.
And when it turns red, that still means there's 3 or 4 more cars can make it through. Don't try to stop. Someone will rear end you.
Yeah, I've always thought, when people offer me jobs up north, I say, do I have to live in any place where the traffic is ridiculous? I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and my daughter went to school in DC, and so we'd go for visits. And when the towers fell, we went to New York, and it had been such a long time since I'd forgotten, so you're driving down the road, all of a sudden a car pulls up in front of a grocery store or bodega or something and gets out. That was once a traveling lane, but now they've turned into a parking lot. I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to stay south if nothing else but for that. So yes, I appreciate that. But so I guess my question is do you find, other than the I guess the kind of indifference that many people up north portray, do you find that people here are warmer and more open and engaging than they are up north? And if so, is it simply because of the busyness of life up north, because more fast-paced? Do you see that as the case?
I guess the I don't know. I guess there's this perception that things go a little slower in the South, and I think that's most people probably live that way a little more down here than they do up there. I think up there they're more just trying to get things done, get out of my way, and it's just a little bit different here.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. That's my experience as well. And I think the only other significant difference between the North and the South is sweet tea. I don't understand, how can they not know what sweet tea is? Like you go in a restaurant, I like a glass of sweet tea. What? Okay, sorry I asked. Yep. I'm in the wrong part of the world. Okay, so you're a CIO, you were an IT director. You are now a CIO at a historically Black college.
Correct.
What is that like for you? What are your experiences in that environment? And I'm not necessarily asking about, the difficulties, but I mean, do you find yourself a bit, so you're in this instance, you are the minority. Do you find yourself a bit taken back by that, or is that just par for the course?
I think it's definitely different. It's the first time in my career where I've been the minority. As I think back through all the other roles that I've had, I've never really been the odd duck, right? And so now it happens regularly where I'm the only white male in a room, and so that's different. It's really been helpful to me, I think, because it helps me appreciate the importance of the diversity and to be a little more sensitive to those situations when there is somebody that is left out because they're the only person of that particular background. So it's been helpful to me, and I think it's helped me stretch and grow a little bit. So I certainly appreciate that opportunity, because it's good for everybody to kind of have a better understanding of that.
Excellent. So in your next leadership role, are there things that you're learning in this experience that will help you be better when there are more white people or more people that you have things in common with? Is this helping you prepare for that?
I think so. One of the things that I want to do is continue to have more diverse experience. I think up until this role, I really haven't thought too much about that. And as I look back now, I see, a lot of experience in higher ed in North Carolina, which is great, but that's a very small view of the world. And as I think about what I want to do next, I'm thinking about, okay, how do I get experience that is going to be different from what I've already done so that I can better understand, not just from a, historically white college to a historically black college, but all sorts of different perspectives. And whether that's, how do I get experience outside of higher ed? How do I get experience in different parts of the world? How do I get exposure to different cultures and everything else? So I think that's where I've still got a lot to grow, but it's one thing at a time, I guess. So try to see what I can do and how I can evolve my career to get a better view of life in general, I guess.
So let me tell you what we have in common. So most often when I go to a meeting, I'm the only person that looks like me in the room. Mm-hmm. And not just in my skin color, but in my gender. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I struggle with that. I don't know I'm always taken serious. I don't know if they trust what I say, like there's some examination of what I said. So if I say we need to implement this technology, or we need to do this thing, or we need to create this service level agreement, there's a silence or a pause in the room. There's almost people are evaluating what I'm saying, and does she really know what she's saying? Do you have that happen to you?
I don't think so, not too much. I guess there are times when it's, when I'm the misfit, a lot of it's not just race, but culturally I'm different too. And so, sometimes people just kind of, look at you a little bit funny or whatever the case may be. But I think for the most part, that's not too much of an issue now.
So the reason why I asked you that question is to go back to what you said earlier about going on to your next step. So you are now in a predominantly white organization, whether it's a college or a private sector company or nonprofit, whatever it is, you're there. And you have Black and brown women. You have people who sexually identify into one group. So now that you've had this experience at Shaw, where you have been the minority, will you have a sense of what those people in the room are feeling when they're the only one, or when there are few and their voices are not always heard? Will you have, I don't even want to use empathy, but will you have the sense of how to help them make their voices heard and to grow and to advance, feeling almost always like they don't belong?
Better than I did before, absolutely. But I think it's going to be hard for me to fully understand where they're coming from, because they've likely been experiencing that the majority of their lives. And so, okay, I have a few years working at an HBCU, that's great, but it's hard to fully close that gap and really understand where they're coming from. But I certainly want to do as good a job at that as I can. So.
Well, I think even though you may not have lived with it like we have, you may not have experienced, but I am sure there's some place in your career you felt a little bite, a little pinch that made you terribly uncomfortable or made you question, why am I here? And so with that, so you're the CIO at Harvard or wherever you are, or at Google or wherever, you're that. And so now you are the person who owns the power. And so you've got all of these people under you that are not white and male, that have not had your experiences. You will still have some way to identify with them, because that you can tell that person is uncomfortable in a space. You don't need somebody to put a red flag up and start waving. You can see it. And so as now I'm in charge, I hold all the power, and I've got these people who I recognize do not have all the same opportunities I have, who aren't taken seriously. How do I address that? And that's really a question. How would you begin to think about that? And not necessarily in actions, but what would be the thoughts that you have with yourself as how to address that?
Well, I think the most important thing, and one of the skills that I've really been trying to develop, these past 5 years or so, has really been improving my leadership skills. And I think that is of utmost importance, because the leader sets the tone for the group. And if you're in that role and you don't care, then the people that support you and the people that you manage in your team are not going to care either. And if you even if you just tolerate somebody in your group to mistreat somebody, then people will see that and they'll recognize that. As the leader, you are in ultimate control of that situation. So, the important thing is to make sure you can recognize it. And so if you can see any of that happen, that you quickly put an end to it. And if people see you taking the correct actions and responding appropriately when those situations come up, they will quickly learn that it's not going to be tolerated. And, you set the bar at whatever level. The old expression, you get what you tolerate, comes to mind. And that's particularly true in a leadership role.
So I think that I'd say probably 60 or 70% of these last three questions, there was something that was looming large in the conversation. I want to know, did you catch it? White privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear it?
Yeah.
So, well, not so much, or that part. And I think it's so hard for most races to recognize privilege or entitlement, because it's what we know, right? So it's Thanksgiving dinner, we're going to have turkey and dressing and green bean casserole. We know that that's what we're going to have. Whether that's the right thing to have or not, maybe we should diverse it up a little. Maybe we should have ham and cabbage or something. But we've had turkey, green bean casserole, and dressing every year traditionally. So when you are something that has been that thing forever and ever, sometimes you don't recognize that you are that thing. Like, I don't subscribe to the thought that all white people are racist. I don't subscribe to the thought that white people only succeed by putting others down. What I really think is we are what we know we are. We are what we've been taught. It's what we have lived our whole lives. And so while you have been a white man, not subjective to any harsher treatment than any other white person, unless you are a criminal or something like that, you haven't experienced a lot of hardships. Whereas I, on the other hand, have. And so if I worked for you, or any Black person, brown person, green person work for you, are you able to identify and recognize and trauma is not my word I want to use, but the challenges and obstacles they have endured to get where they are?
Yes. And so I think I guess one of the differences, like my baseline is different than your baseline, right? And, I can kind of cruise down the street and, if I get pulled over by a police officer, for example, I'm not sweating bullets, right? Whereas I suspect that people of color, like, they're scared, right? There's like all these bad things happen. How do I handle this situation? And there may be things that I can do to contribute to a situation to make it worse. But I'm starting at a higher baseline, statistically speaking, than you would be, right? So recognizing that is kind of the first step, I guess. And try to understand, where everybody else is, so you can kind of adjust appropriately and say, okay, well, here is, I'm lucky enough to have, this starting place, and not everybody, is playing on a level playing field in the world that we're in. And so just trying to acknowledge that, and then do what I can to help close those gaps, I guess.
Yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. I would just add this one last piece to this. There are probably Black and brown people with way more experience, more education, who don't have the opportunity to be the CIO anywhere, much less at Shaw or a higher education facility. And they probably never will. Now they may make some traction up the ladder, but it's not that high. Mm-hmm. And so when you are in that space of hiring, that you're thinking about it, like, I don't think you should hire someone simply because they're Black, or simply because they're female, or simply because of some characteristic that has nothing to do with what the job requires, but at least to be given a full bite of the apple, as opposed to being removed from the apple. These application tracking systems now are done by algorithms and artificial intelligence. So it's so easy to dismiss someone. And so people who are in a position of hiring must be intentional in order to break through those biases and these inherent thoughts we have about each other, right? So, and I am absolutely guilty of this, so I'm terribly afraid to go out at night, and I don't know why, but I am. And so I try not to go out at night at all, unless I absolutely have to. I go to the grocery store at old dark early, so I'm not out at late, so my fear may not even be rational or logical, but it's there. So, but I don't think about it like somebody Black is going to hurt me. I think, well, somebody white's going to hurt me, because, got all these people that hate me simply because of the color of my skin, the texture of my hair, the thickness of my lips. They just hate me. So I don't want to put myself in a position where they can decide to remove me from the earth before it's my time to be removed from the earth. So, the point I'm just trying to make is, like, the inherent thoughts that we believe about each other may or may not be true.
Right.
It may or may not be true. So when you hear Black Lives Matter, what comes to mind?
There are a few things that come to mind. I guess the first natural thought is, well, all lives matter. But there's a particular emphasis on the Black Lives Matter movement because of all the things that have been going on for years and years in terms of mistreatment. And it's disheartening to see on the news, the next, incident with police brutality, or, somebody getting shot in the back because they were, stealing some cigarettes or something like that, that just makes you wonder, like, how did this happen? How did we get to this point where, sure, you shouldn't have been stealing cigarettes, but is that worth dying for, right? How did we so quickly escalate from, a minor theft to a major police brutality kind of incident? And I guess what I think about is, how can we as a society get to the point where this is no longer happening all the time? How can we solve the problem? And how can we prevent some of these situations from happening? I guess that's what I think about, is how do we solve the issue?
So, this is this part of this conversation. I have this often with white people, is they always identify the causation, right? So this happened to that person because they were stealing cigarettes, or they were doing something. where there's very little evidence to suggest that. So Mr. Floyd supposedly died because he had a counterfeit $20 bill. To this day, no one has concretely confirmed that he had a counterfeit $20 bill, but that's the causation that ended his life. Or, you know, someone standing on the corner selling loose cigarettes. You know, and so I think that, you know, if you think about America, you know, and law and order, just the true sense of American law and order. So the colonists, the pilgrims, and all of those kind of folks who came to this world that was inhabited by Native Americans brought so much violence to this world. And it was justified, you know, it shows that they were heroes and they were, you know, founders and forefathers and all these things without actually thinking about what they did to the Native Americans who were at this land before they ever came. You know, I watched the white supremacist program not too long ago on Vice, and they were talking about we're taking our country back. But what ran through my mind, taking it back where? What
Yeah.
country? You are an immigrant here just like anybody else. Now you might have been a terrorist all that time, but there were people here before you got here. And then to further take that, you know, so you brought these people from Africa into this country and you enslaved them, you terrorized them, you brutalized them, you raped them, everything you could do. And so now that we're living under law and order, so here are the laws that's on the books, the rule of law, you know, we're living justice and all that stuff, where justice belongs to the person who says it's justice, right? So the Supreme Court, the judges, the police officers decide what justice is. But is it truly justice? So, you know, if for whatever reason you were pulled over and they said, well, Mr. Alexander, you were doing 30 miles over the speed limit, we're going to have to take you in. More than likely, you will calmly go. You'll have some few choice words that you're saying underneath your breath, but you calmly go and do whatever it is you need to do, pay your fine, and go home and go on about your life. Whereas if my son had that experience, he's probably saying those same words under his voice, but he is not so subtle in his view of what's happening to him, right? So he's not taking it well, if you will. He's a bit discouraged by why this is happening. He's going to share his thoughts with Mr. Police Officer. And Mr. Police Officer is then going to say he's resisting arrest. Mm-hmm. Law and order belongs to those who owns the law. It doesn't mean that it's really law and it's just. It just means that that's what we have. And so when I think about where we are in our society, white privilege, white supremacy, all of these things are very violent terms, you know, violent words. You know, the fact that we have words, constructs that describe us. So you are a white man, I am a black woman. What did either one of us just say about who we are? So what does it mean to be a white man? Does it mean your skin is lighter than mine? You have lighter color eyes than I do? You have, but then what? What else is there to that once you get past those physical things that you can identify?
Right, and I think that's where so many people take that too far and they make assumptions about who you are based on, you know, the physical characteristics that have nothing to do with who you are as a person. I think that's where, as a society, we need to be careful not to label people into this bucket or that bucket, and like, oh, you are bad because of you are da 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 da. And I, you know, recently I've started to better understand a lot of the situations with the police as some of the issues that we faced, you know, and how it's kind of built up over time, starting with the drug war that happened in the 80s and how we started rapidly growing the police force to, you know, tackle this war on drugs. And what problem are we really solving with that? And we're basically arming the police with all this military equipment so that they can build these SWAT teams, so they can start going after people for drugs. And back to your point, they're targeting all these people that, oh, you look like you might be doing drugs, that may be completely innocent. And with, kind of, we've seen what happens with the erosion of the Fourth Amendment rights and say, hey, I'm protected from search and seizure. Well, unless I think you might be doing drugs, in which case I'm going to search and seize all your stuff. And then also to your point, what is your experience when you're dealing with the police? And unless you say no to the police, they can say, oh, well, that's consent. And we can, we can search you and, find whatever it is we want to find. And if you are being intimidated by the police, do you feel like you're in a comfortable position to tell them no? Most people probably aren't. And they don't know that they're allowed to say no and say, no, I don't want you to search me. But you got a bunch of big dudes around you, saying, will you let us do this? Oh, what do you do? So a lot of people give in, and then they've given up their right to protect themselves. But it's kind of sad to see how all these things have kind of come together around the drug war, which you think is, oh, getting rid of drugs, that's good. But has it really made a difference? Or has it just given police the excuse to harass a bunch of people and, stir up all these problems where, they break down the wrong door and someone ends up getting killed because, hey, these intruders are coming into my house. I don't know they're police officers. I don't know what's going on. And we've seen that happen time and time again.
Yeah, anyway. I think that one of the interesting things about, how we define people, so there are all these stereotypes about Black people, white people, and brown people, and all these people. I think stereotyping is one way of saying I'm better than you. I'll tell you a little story. So a few Christmases ago, I have a group of women I mentor. They're not young, they're 30s or so. And so we decided to go to Raleigh for Christmas. So a couple lived in Chapel Hill, couple in Raleigh, couple in Durham. So we decided to go in, we're hanging out, we're having a great time. Now, 4 of these women are white. 2 of them are Black, and 1 of them is Latina. So we're having a great time. We're in this country western bar, and we're hearing music that we had never heard before. And we're sitting there and we're having a good time. And of the white women, 2 of them were blonde and blue eyes. The rest of them were brunettes. So they started drinking and, dancing to country music. And we're just making a scene because we don't even know what the hell these people are saying. It's like, what kind of music is this? There must be some kind of foreign music. Maybe it's a symphony or something. We're just having a great time making fun of the music. But the 2 blonde women get into a fight with the 2 brunette women. And it was absolutely hilarious. So I don't drink. So, I'm sitting here as a designated driver and just having a great time. And so the blonde women tell the brunette women how much better they are than them because they have blonde hair, natural blonde hair, and these big, bright, beautiful eyes. And then the brunette women say to the blonde women, but you're dumb as a stick. And these are 4 white people talking to each other about things, and after I'd had my fill of it, because it was really falling down to ridiculousness, I said, okay, when you woke up this morning, what color were you? White? Okay, let's just make sure that's the case. Is there anything else we need to discuss here? Because the color of your hair doesn't mean a damn thing unless you make it so. And through that experience, so I talk to these women quite often because they find themselves on the wrong side of some kind of situation. And I talk to them quite often. And I always ask, why does it matter what you physically see in a person? So the person that you're going to marry, the person that you're going to be friends with, the person who you want to study with, why does anything physical matter? So if the person doesn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, does that mean they're a lesser person? They're still white, aren't they? I mean, you just have brown hair and brown eyes or whatever color eyes you have. Why does something so physical mean so much to people? Why? I mean, I cannot understand why. And I'll tell you one more little piece for this. I worked at UNC Chapel Hill in the 90s, and my office was directly underneath the coroner. He was the coroner for the state. Great old guy, just a very, very nice old white man. And so he had fun terrorizing me because, he would call me up there to show me sawing off somebody's brain head or something. So he wonderful man. I don't mean any disrespectful. But he called me up to his office one day, and they had found a person who had been in the outside for like 11 or 12 days. And he says, "Who do you think this is?" And I'm like, "I have no way of knowing." He says, "Well, do you think this is a black person or a white person?" I said, "A black person, because the person had turned completely black. There wasn't a single likeness to anywhere of the skin. The hair had gone away. So there was nothing more than the physical structure and whatever skin that remained on the person's body." And he said, "This is the problem with society, because we make so much out of skin and physical characteristics. But yet and still, when we die, we all end up almost the same color."
Mm-hmm.
And that experience really changed what I thought about race. I don't recognize people and say, okay, they're white because their skin is lighter than mine, or their eyes are different, or their lips are thinner or thicker. I just think that we're all just people. And I'll end my short little narrative with this, and that's the universe. The universe is probably the best teacher in the world. When you walk outside your house or your school or whatever it is, there's not one single oak tree. There's not one single pine tree or magnolia or crepe or birch or cedar. The universe is replete with gazillion types of trees, flowers, creatures. So why is it we, who's supposed to be the better, higher thinking beings, don't see that same logic? The reason there is a necessity of diversity.
Yeah, why can't we figure that out, right?
Right.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. I mean, I guess the only thing I think about is as people, select their mate, they're just looking for what's going to make the best baby, right? So generally they're looking for things like, symmetry in your face and, athletic build and things like that will generally lead to a healthy baby. That's kind of the programming I think that's going on in the back of most people's heads, whether they realize it or not. But yeah, beyond that, it's focusing on blonde hair, brunette, white, black, whatever, kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that there is so much to dissect in the conversation of race and gender, and I've always heard that in order for light to exist, there must be dark. For every bit of truth, there's a little bit of a lie, and every bit of a lie, there's a little bit of truth. So whatever this is, the way we are as a society, I think we do ourselves a disservice, because the more people that work together for a common good, the better we are. When we separate ourselves by physical constructs, if you were hiring a security officer for your job, you want to make sure that person knew security well enough to protect you. But even when you hire that person who's, been a CISO or ISO, whatever you want to call it, for a number of years, something's going to get by that person, because we are prone to fail. We're not perfect. But if we judge that one mistake and say, well, he's not as smart as I thought he was, it does you a disservice, not him, because that you infer or imply that he has to be perfect. And I think that when we take race apart like that, you watch TV and they show some black man who's killed 38 people in one time, oh, all black people are this way. When you don't think that about white people. So the white guy who, the Boy Scouts is probably the best example. You got all these pedophiles in the Boy Scouts, in the Catholic Church. We don't see that in the same lens that we see that black guy who's done something that's unlawful.
Right.
And I really believe that, we in technology have special obligation to bring harmony and humanity to our work, because emerging technologies is not going to care what color you are. The way things are going, they're not going to care. Male, female, young, old, black, white, blue, green, whatever it is, it's not going to care. And so we have been entrusted with a gift, if you will, technology that can make all lives better, but we don't. We have our own biases we bring to technology, right? So if you're creating an algorithm or a new system, what are the kind of things that you are going to ask? And if you don't ask that with someone that's different from you, you're going to get the same result. So you will produce you.
Right. And I think we've seen some of the artificial intelligence stuff and how that's played out. You know, it works a lot of the time, but it doesn't work every time. And we've seen some of the, you know, repercussions of that. I don't remember the one gentleman's name that was arrested in front of his kids. You know, it's like, you know, we caught you on camera, we ran this through the system and it identified you. And the guy's being interrogated and he's like, that's not me. Like, you see this? Like, look at my face. And it's just like, you know, I made a mistake. And if you program the system only knows what it's programmed. So if we take years of information that has any sort of bias in it and we pump it into the computer's going to be biased too.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we have to be careful of that and not just assume that, oh, well, the computer knows best, and not to question it because it's built on whatever we fed the machine, garbage in, garbage out. So you know,
you're too young to know what that phrase means. That phrase is older than Methuselah. You're not supposed to know what that means.
Oh man, I've seen it happen a few times.
Absolutely. I remember when that was the key phrase, you know. But okay, so we have about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna leave the remainder of time to talk to you. Thank you so much for chatting with me. It's always fun to chat with you and to hear your insights and thoughts, so thank you for doing that. Remainder of time is yours, and I will send you a link once this video converts.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm happy to do it anytime you want again. And, you know, I guess on one hand, I'm, you know, just trying to do my part so that I can learn to be a better citizen in society and help kind of solve these issues and do what I can from where I sit. And I'm excited about getting things where I think they need to go. And I hope that we can make steady progress towards that end. And there's a lot of, you know, small victories that I think are coming along the way, but there are many hurdles to overcome still. So I guess we'll just kind of see what happens and continue to do our part, whether that's, you know, political and voting for the right people, or you know, participating in the events that can help bring change to our culture. Everything that we can to make this a better place.
I absolutely agree. I challenge you to remember that you are a part of the solution too. In order for there to be a solution, there must be unity, and there must be people willing to fight in the trenches. And that does not mean go outside and hold up a sign and protest, but that means correcting injustices when you see it. You know, so, you know, when you're hiring someone, if your colleagues sit around you and say, well, you know, you've already hired out one Black person for the century. We don't need to hire anymore. That you speak up and say something, you know, that those conversations are not allowed to exist, that you correct it when it's wrong and you appreciate it when it's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David. It is always wonderful to talk to you. And believe me, I'll come and find you and bother you again. You aren't going to get away from me that fast. But,
yeah,
you know, I think you're a bright young man, and I think you have a lot of things to offer the future. And I hope to see you as you do that. I want to see how it manifests itself. And if I can help you, I'm right here.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Stay safe.
All right. Bye.
Bye.